Samantha told you this? I asked. Yes, she said while still shuffling pages. She sounded bothered by what she was telling me. The two women, Samantha and Amanda, how bad was the animosity? I asked. I can't say for sure with Amanda, Ross said. Like I said, I never actually talked to her. But Samantha was very upset about Amanda. It was as if she were married to the guy and Amanda was the other woman, trying to steal her husband. What's his name? I asked. She was silent again for a few seconds, then said, Clark Broadhead. That was the name Samantha told me. I quickly wrote the name down. Professor Ross, again, I can't stress enough how crucial this is. Please tell me everything Samantha told you about him. There isn't a lot, she said. I know he's married and has kids. He's in his 30s, maybe 40s. He owns some sort of contracting business. I think it's concrete, but I might be wrong. The other things I already knew, but the last tidbit was extremely helpful. There had to be dozens, maybe even hundreds of concrete contractors in Utah County. But that knowledge in conjunction with his name and where he lived was bound to bring something up when searched together on Google. He must be fairly successful, or he wouldn't be living in Cedar Hills, she continued. And I'm guessing not bad looking, considering he was able to woo two attractive college girls at the same time. In fact, I would describe Amanda as beautiful, not just attractive. I had to agree with her. This Clark Broadhead guy definitely knew how to play the field. I could easily find myself envying him if he wasn't also a scumbag for doing it while already married with children. Do you know Amanda's last name? I asked. Not off the top of my head, she answered. I heard some shuffling of paper and objects being moved. But when I saw your message yesterday, I dug through some old files I have here in my home office. I guessed you would want some information from that time. She certainly had that right. I wished I had just talked to Ross in the first place. She was a goldmine of missing pieces. I have a roster from the time when both she and Samantha were listed on the service project of, let me see, she said thoughtfully. I heard more shuffling, perhaps pages in a book or folder being turned. Okay, here it is, Amanda Demford. I wrote down the name. I'm assuming both, or at least Samantha, knew Broadhead was married? I asked. Samantha knew, of course. I'm not sure about Amanda, Ross answered. Samantha was convinced Broadhead was going to leave his wife, and the two of them would get married. She was absolutely head over heels for the guy. Do you know if Broadhead's wife knew about Samantha? I don't know, but probably not. Like I told you, Samantha was inexperienced and extremely naive. I think he was keeping her far away from his married life. From some of the things she told me, I'm pretty sure he was pretty experienced with that sort of thing. He knew how to find and play girls like Samantha. But she was wising up and getting assertive. Assertive? Yes, Ross went on, threatening to tell his wife. At least that's what she told me. What was his reaction? I don't know a lot about it, she said. But I know he got angry a few times with her, yelled at her, threatened to never see her again if she didn't stop with the threats. Did he ever get physical? I asked. Not that I know of. I never saw bruises or anything like that. What about Amanda? Do you think the wife knew about her? I don't have any idea, but those two girls sure knew about each other, and I guess it all got pretty bad. A lot of anger and hatred. When Samantha had found out about Amanda, I guess Samantha began threatening Broadhead again about going to his wife if he didn't quit seeing Amanda. Ross let out a breath in disgust. I got so sick of hearing about it after a while. It was like being in junior high with all the drama. I begged Samantha to just walk away from it and concentrate on her schooling. She only had a year and a half left. It wasn't worth the headache, but just like a lovesick 13-year-old, she wouldn't hear of it. Wouldn't stop seeing the guy. We both sat quietly for a few seconds as I processed everything Ross had told me. My phone suddenly emitted a small alarm, and I saw Kent was trying to call me. I didn't want to risk ending the role I was on with Ross by putting her on hold, so I texted, "I'll get back to you in a few," to Kent and ignored his call. "Did the Provo police ever talk to you?" I asked. "Only once," she said. "They asked me if I knew where she was and when I had seen her last." "Can you remember who it was or what they looked like?" "Huge guy. I think his name was Mickelson or Mendelson, something like that." "Mortensen," I said, correcting her. "Yes, I believe that was his name." A ding telling me I had received a text made me check my screen quickly. "Roger that," was Kent's reply. I put my phone back up to my ear. "Did you tell him what you've told me?" I asked Ross. "No. I only told him when I had seen her last. The campus police are the only ones I've told everything I've told you." "And they didn't follow up on it?" I asked. "They did, or at least claimed they did." "So you asked them if they had?" I asked. "Yes. When a month had gone by and they hadn't found her, I called Grayson and asked him if they had talked to Broadhead. He told me they did, and he wasn't a suspect." "What about Amanda? Do you know if they ever checked into her?" I asked. "That I don't know," she said. "Soon after that phone call I made to Grayson, it was like the very next day, I got a visit from Atchison. I was told to drop it or I would be looking for another job. It was before I received tenure. I was vulnerable and I got scared. So I did what I was told to do." She said this with shame in her voice. "Is that why you never told Mortensen about Broadhead?" I asked in a subdued tone. I felt like she was getting close to not wanting to talk about it any further, and I didn't want to push too hard. "Yes, I was worried that if Mortensen came to the campus to press the issue with the other kids in the program or something, Atchison would know I was the one who talked." "Do you think either one of them had anything to do with Samantha's disappearance? Either Broadhead or Amanda?" She didn't answer right away, but sat breathing and cleared her throat a few times. I couldn't be sure, but I wondered if she was wiping at her eyes and trying not to cry. "I don't know," she said somberly. "I've been around long enough and have seen enough in my life to know anyone is capable of anything. I love it at this school, and I love Utah. I love Utah County. I wish I could believe it was as peaceful and tranquil as it's presented to be. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot better than other places I've lived. But the people who live here are just that, people. And even though I think Mormons are among the best people you could ever hope to find, they're still just that, people. They have shortcomings and failures like anyone. Do I know what happened to Samantha? No. Do I think she was murdered by a rival or a paranoid lover? I don't want to think so. My gut tells me no. But I know better than to say I'm positive she wasn't. I know that's a lousy answer, but that's the best I can offer." I frantically took notes as she said all this, making sure I had names and timelines right. I continued writing after she stopped speaking, and an awkward silence ensued. "Anything else to tell me?" I asked to break the silence. "I suppose you consider me a coward and a terrible person," she said. "Not at all," I responded. "I think you were in a tough position and did what you thought was best at the time." At this she gave a small, derisive laugh. "That's a euphemistic way of calling me craven, Mr. Greenwood." "Not true," I said, and I meant it. "You did in fact check with the campus police, and they said Broadhead and Amanda weren't suspects. You then got a visit from your superior, who stated you'd be fired if you kept up inquiries. I think you did what you could do at the time." "Hmm," was all her response to this, and I was sure she didn't believe me. But she said nothing. "We're on to Broadhead now," I told her. "If there's anything, we'll find it. If so, I'll let you know. Then you can do what you think you should have done, but with something to back it up. Let me ask you this, though. You mentioned it was all hushed up to avoid scandal. Is that your take on things, or did Atchison actually say that to you?" "It's a guess," she said. "He wasn't about to tell me anything. I was still untenured at the time, and I wasn't worth the trouble, I suppose. But Professor Wilding and I have talked about it quite a bit, and Professor Welding has heard from reliable sources that was the gist of it. The campus police had determined Broadhead had nothing to do with Samantha's disappearance, and therefore the story getting out would only result in scandal. So it was decided to place a lid on it." "Was it a decision from Atchison, or someone even higher up?" I asked. "That, Mr. Greenwood, is one thing that is way beyond both my and Wilding's pay grade. But suffice it to say, it was high up enough to warrant everyone to shut up. I'm guessing that's why you got the reception you did from Grayson." I began to feel pity for her. Here she was, the lone woman in her department and at a school that demanded obedience and uniformity. For the past 3 years, she had known about a sex scandal and suspected a possibility of something much worse, but didn't feel free to tell anyone or do anything about it. It had obviously bothered her, even tortured her. I closed my spiral notebook. I'll keep in touch. Please do, Mr. Greenwood. I failed her. I know that. I want to make up for it if I can, she said. I think you already have, Professor Ross, I replied. Not really, Ross said sadly, but I'll do what I can. I couldn't think of anything else to say when she finished talking, so we both said goodbye. I stood up and stretched. I made a quick trip to the bathroom, then came back out and looked at my phone again. It was only 8 in the morning. Ross must have called me at about 7:15. I brought up my contacts as I walked out to the kitchen and tapped Kent's name. It rang only once before Kent's voice came on the line. Hey now, he said. So you're still alive? I asked in jest. Barely, he said. I feel like I should be dead. I don't think there's anything that doesn't hurt right now. How's the shoulder? I asked him. Swollen and killing me, he answered. Are you going to be able to work today? I asked. I'm already dressed and ready to go. Tell me what you found out. I would have argued with him about getting back to work so quickly, but I knew it would be a waste of time. Besides, I needed the help. I related my conversations with Brooke Kingston and Karen Ross. I'll head down to the shop right now and grab the Odyssey, Kent said as soon as I was done. I'll have eyes on him within the hour. I'm assuming you're going to track down this Amanda Demford girl and get the truth out of her. You read my mind, I replied. Okay, I'll head out right now. Have you done any checking on Broadhead's name? Kent asked. No, I called you as soon as I got done talking to Ross. I'll do it, Kent said. I think we better move fast. If Broadhead and this Amanda Demford are still a thing, Broadhead most likely already knows we're sniffing around. If he had anything to do with Samantha's disappearance, he'll be sterilizing any trail as we speak. Agreed, I said. Be careful with Broadhead, Kent. If he's a killer, he probably won't hesitate to do it again. Kent didn't verbally answer, just gave a grunt and hung up. I hurriedly took a shower and got dressed. I got a couple of granola bars from the kitchen, grabbed my PI gear bag, and walked out to my expedition. As I was getting in the driver's seat, I heard someone shout my name and looked over my shoulder. It was Gary. Hey, Gary, I said. Oh, geez, I'm sorry I haven't got that six-pack I promised you. I'll bring it by your apartment tonight. He waved his hand in a forget-about-it gesture and walked over to my vehicle. I got in, closed the door, and rolled down the window as he approached. Don't worry about it, Seth, he said. That's not why I want to talk to you. I nodded and inserted my key into the ignition, but waited before starting the vehicle. I could feel a ticking clock in my head and didn't want to waste time talking about football or politics for the next 30 minutes. What's up? I asked. Gary looked tired and unkempt. His hair was sticking up and his clothes looked dirty, like maybe he had hurriedly put on yesterday's work attire to come out and speak with me. Gary was one of the few people in the complex that I genuinely liked. He was married with a 3-year-old girl and 10-month-old baby boy. He was a good mechanic, but there was something off about his work habits that kept getting him fired or laid off. I never asked him about it, seeing him more as a close acquaintance than a friend, but I'm sure his issues were similar to everyone else's in the complex. He most likely had a drug or alcohol problem, or perhaps it was a natural issue like mental illness. He never struck me as lazy, but he was out of a job more often than not. Whatever his personal faults, he had always been friendly and helpful to me, so I was totally willing to reciprocate if he was in trouble of some kind. You know Eduardo, the guy that lives on the second floor of Building C? He asked. I had to think for a minute if I knew who he was talking about. An image of a Hispanic man in his early 20s with a tattoo on his left arm floated into my mind. I think so, I answered. Does he drive a yellow modified Honda Civic with a spoiler on the back? Gary nodded. Yeah, that's the guy. I was talking to him last night in the laundry room about the morning that crazy woman was honking the train horn in front of your apartment. Okay, I said warily. I instantly became concerned Gary was going to tell me that Chrissy hit Eduardo's car. But what Gary said made me more than worried. It caused the hairs on my arms to stand up and an instant sheen of sweat to form on my forehead. Eduardo said he was out in front of his apartment smoking a cigarette. I guess his girlfriend won't let him smoke inside anymore because she's pregnant, and was just standing there when all of a sudden that jacked up Chevy of your friends came motoring into the complex. He said it got his attention because whoever was driving it was swerving all over the place, and he was certain they were going to crash into something. Anyway, it parked in front of your place, and that's when that psycho lady started hitting the horn. Gary laughed at this and scratched his chin while looking to his left to watch a blue Pontiac with rusted fenders and a crack all the way across the windshield pull in and park about 3 stalls away from us. I glanced over too and noticed 2 young women, one blonde and Caucasian, and the other a black-haired Hispanic, get out of the vehicle. They were both wearing workout clothes, the sheer yoga pants on the Hispanic woman fitting flattering on her toned legs. They both glanced over and noticed us looking. Instantly, Gary and I looked away with the guilt all men feel if they happen to possess even a modicum of class when caught ogling. Both women made it a point to ignore us and walk toward an apartment that was part of Gary's building. "Sometimes I wish I wasn't married," he said comradely and low enough so the women couldn't hear. I nodded in agreement, then prodded him to continue with his story. "So she didn't hit anything then?" He looked at me confused for a second, possibly thinking I was referring to one of the women we just saw. "Oh yeah, no, she didn't hit anything," he finally said. "But Eduardo said that after she blew the horn a few times, your front door suddenly opened and 2 guys came out in a hurry. I mean, full out rear end and elbows out the front and down the street. You okay? Why are you looking at me like that? Seth, where are you going?" Chapter 13, L. Ader. I would learn from Gary that my face had turned pale and my eyes had gotten a glazed over look that made him think I was having a stroke or a heart attack. He said I had jumped out of my vehicle and run back to my apartment so fast I had bumped into him and sent him scuffling to the pavement. I retrieved the .38 I had absent-mindedly left sitting on my nightstand. Since I so rarely carried, I had simply forgotten to get it amidst the rush to get out the door. I put the .38 inside my pants on the right side, just barely past my hip. I had found that was the most comfortable carry position for me. I didn't have time to worry about 2 short-eyed scumbags, and I was more than happy to forget they even existed. But if they had been willing to creep into my apartment when I was asleep, it meant they presented a whole new level of threat. I determined they had reached the level I called a shoot on sight. If I saw them and I could safely do it, I would hold back and call the police. But if they came within 20 feet of me, I was going to reach and pull the trigger. They had already injured Kent with the intention of doing serious bodily harm, and as far as I was concerned, they had been in my apartment to kill me. Chrissy's crazy antics that morning had likely saved my life. I came back out, but before closing my door, I scanned the door jamb and lock for any signs of tampering, mentally chastising myself for not doing it earlier. I didn't see any signs of forced entry, but that alone meant little. The locks on my apartment door were just your run-of-the-mill standard wear anyone could buy at Home Depot or Walmart. It wouldn't take a pro to pick them. Gary was still standing by my expedition with a confused look on his face when I got back to the parking lot. "Is everything okay, Seth?" he asked. I just nodded and grunted an almost inaudible "fine" as I got back into my vehicle. I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot. He stared after me with the look a person must give a schizophrenic when the afflicted victim suddenly exclaims terror at an image no one else can see. I didn't have time to explain anything to Gary, so I put him out of my mind as I drove to Amanda Demford's last listed address. Kent had made a beeline to the shop after he finished talking to Seth. Kent wanted to laugh every time he considered he actually owned a minivan. He doubted Honda had him in mind when they designed it for the U.S. market, but he had to admit the thing was perfect for surveillance. He just hoped no one he knew ever saw him driving it. After Kent had found the address Seth texted to him, he had parked 2 houses to the west. Finding basic information about Clark Broadhead had been easy with his name, the city he lived in, and what kind of work he did. It took Kent less than 5 minutes to confirm that the address was indeed the residence of a Clark Broadhead, 39 years old, married for 15 years, and the current owner of Skylight Foundations, a construction firm specializing in foundation work. His wife's name was Cheryl, and they had 4 children, 16-year-old Cassidy, 14-year-old Mark, 11-year-old Stephen, and 5-year-old Cynthia. He hadn't found any mention of foster children, but that wasn't surprising. The state did a good job keeping that information confidential, but Kent didn't think it would be necessary to confirm if they had been foster parents. He was close to certain they had the right guy. Kent sat for more than 3 hours before any sign of life presented itself. This came in the form of a small girl who ventured outside in a blue hooded coat and a pair of pink Barbie roller skates. The little girl had to be Cynthia Broadhead. She was the definition of cute as she skated around the front yard. The term skated was generous. It was more of a sliding motion akin to Frankenstein's monster as she forced each foot in front of the other. It was a scene that made Kent smile. It reminded him of his childhood. He had a little sister, 4 years his junior, who had been the bane of his existence while growing up. She had constantly followed him around and tried to be involved with everything he and his friends had done. He had chased her off 100 times, and yet she always tried to follow again to be part of their ball games or to make herself an honorary member of clubs he and his friends created. A part of his heart ached just thinking about it. She was now a single mother living in Minneapolis. He hadn't seen her in over 5 years. Sure, there was the yearly phone call during the holidays, but neither one of them ever seemed to have the time to visit the other. It amazed him sometimes how fast time went by. How did he become a man in his mid-30s? He looked at his reflection in the driver's side mirror and almost didn't recognize the face staring back at him with its developing crow's feet at the corners of his eyes and the ever-increasing gray hairs showing up in his neatly trimmed Van Dyke beard. Long gone was the 12-year-old boy angrily chasing off the pestering 7-year-old sister. He went back to studying the house. It was the modern-day version of a cookie-cutter tract house. All the homes seemed to have a stucco theme. This one, Kent knew, was valued at more than $400,000. It wasn't surprising considering the neighborhood. Most of the homes in the area were valued at that level, some as much as $600,000. Kent guessed concrete was paying well, and he shook his head a little in dismay at the thought of how out of reach such a home would be for him. The garage door to the home suddenly began to rise, and Kent sank down in the driver's seat as a gray Nissan Titan backed out. He felt like a novice trying to play cop as he laid completely down when the pickup backed out onto the street next to the minivan. In his mind's eye, he pictured the driver, Clark Broadhead, looking the parked minivan over suspiciously as he idled in the road. Kent then imagined Broadhead punching in 911 on his cell phone. But the pickup's engine accelerated as the truck pulled away. Kent sat up and hurriedly switched on the engine of the minivan. He waited for the Titan to turn out of sight of the van before he put the Odyssey into drive and followed. Kent wasn't sure where Broadhead was headed until he exited on Pleasant Grove Boulevard off I-15. Once Broadhead turned south, Kent knew his destination. Kent speed-dialed Seth's number, but only got voicemail. "Hey," Kent said after the beep, "I put eyes on the pickup, and it is the house that the pickup pulled into. I'm following him to a place called Skylight Foundations. Give me a call back when you get this message." He hit the button to end the call and kept driving. He entered the address for Skylight Foundations into his phone. The business was located on the southwest side of I-15 in a business park dominated by warehouses and mid-level office buildings. He hurriedly texted the location to Seth as he watched the Titan turn left into a parking lot adjacent to a Red Stones building with a gated lot in the back. Kent scanned the area and smiled when he saw he could park in the parking lot of one of the office buildings across the street from Broadhead and still have a good view of the construction business. The office building parking lot was half full of cars, not terribly unusual for a Saturday if there was a crew working in one of the warehouses nearby. Kent purposely chose a spot that was sandwiched between a Chevy Tahoe and a Toyota Land Cruiser in hopes it would help camouflage the Odyssey. He backed into the spot so the nose of the van pointed towards Skylight Foundations. Kent then walked to the back of the van and opened a large black container. Inside was an assortment of items he and Seth found handy on surveillance jobs. Kent moved aside spare clothes Seth had left inside, as well as a jacket and a pair of hiking boots. Kent scrunched his brow, wondering why in the world his business partner would keep such a thing in the van. Then he found what he was looking for, a pair of binoculars and a small digital Sony camera. Kent doubted he would use the camera, but the binoculars he would use for sure. He made his way back up to the front and sat in the driver's seat. He scanned the construction business in front of him and didn't see any sign of the Titan. He glanced at his watch and saw it was 12:30. If Broadhead stayed put for a while, Kent was going to confront him about his affair with Samantha Palmerson. It was bad form to do so at Broadhead's business, possibly in front of employees and even customers. But Kent saw it as doing Broadhead a favor. Better embarrass him in front of some schmuck who was there to talk about the driveway he wanted poured than in front of Broadhead's wife and kids. Kent settled in and waited. I drove straight to Amanda's apartment. It was 9:15 a.m., and I was hoping she didn't have Saturday morning classes. Her apartment building was just barely off of BYU campus and nowhere near as nice as Brooke Kingston's. It was, however, still nicer than mine. Of course, so were most government housing projects, so that wasn't saying much. I found her apartment and knocked on her door, but I wasn't feeling hopeful. It was dead quiet inside. I waited for 3 minutes and then tried knocking again, this time a lot harder in case she was there but asleep. It didn't rouse Amanda or any possible roommates, but a door next to hers opened, and a sleepy woman in her early 20s poked her head out. Her hair was practically standing straight up and pointing in 1,000 directions. She only put her head and shoulders out, careful not to show any more of herself than possible. "Can I help you?" she asked in an annoyed tone. I cleared my throat and sheepishly said, "Yes, I'm looking for Amanda Demford. Do you know where she is?" The girl's demeanor changed from annoyed to curious. "Who are you? Her dad?" she asked. "Her dad?" I asked incredulously. "Do I seriously look that old?" She rubbed her eyes and straightened a little, the door opening a little more to expose her upper body. She was wearing an oversized Anaheim Angels t-shirt as a nightgown. "You look a little old to be a boyfriend," she said. "Are you her brother? Her uncle? I'm not going to just tell any strange-looking guy private stuff about her." "I look that creepy, huh?" I asked with a disappointed tone. It was a hard moment when you realized you truly weren't among the young anymore. She didn't answer or respond to my banter, but just stood looking at me like I was an idiot. I had to agree with her assessment of me and shrug my shoulders. I decided honesty would be the best policy before the young woman called the cops. "I need to speak to her about Samantha Palmerson's disappearance," I told her. Her countenance now changed to surprise. "So you're a cop?" she asked. "No, I'm a private investigator hired by Samantha's father." "Serious?" she asked. The sleepiness now gone, she stepped out of her apartment. She was an attractive strawberry blonde, maybe 5'6" with green eyes and a medium build. She crossed her arms across her chest and huddled against the early morning breeze. "Yes, I'm serious. I need to talk to her for a few minutes. Do you know where I can reach her?" "You don't have her cell?" she asked. I felt color rise to my face. I was supposed to be a private detective, and I never got the one thing from either Brooke Kingston or Amanda Demford that would have made it the easiest to talk to them. Here was a college kid, probably studying business management or something, and it was the first thing she thought of. "No, I don't," I said, trying hard to keep the embarrassment out of my voice. "That's why I'm here. Do you know where she is?" The girl shook her head no. I blew out my breath, disappointed. "Okay, thanks," I said as I turned and walked toward the stairway. "Aren't you going to ask me where she works?" she called out to me just as I was starting down the stairway. I stopped and hurriedly ran back to the top. "Absolutely," I said, "but you just told me that you didn't know where she was." She gave me a look of incredulity. "I don't know where she is. She might be at work, or school, or on a plane to Japan. It's not my job in life to keep track of her, but if you would like to know where she works, I can tell you." She said all this in a tone an orderly at a mental hospital might use when speaking to a patient who was being particularly dopey. I checked my pride and gave her the best boyish smile I could muster and shrugged. "Sorry," I said. "I guess I'm not thinking straight." Her face didn't change expression. "She works at the Sew and Pin at University Mall," she said. "At least as of last month she did. She's gone a lot, so who knows?" With that, she ducked back into her apartment and shut the door. "Thank you," I said to the closed door, and I made my way back down the stairs. Normally, I wouldn't disturb someone at work. It's bad form, and in my opinion, unprofessional. I might only be a private investigator, but often I came across to others as a cop. Employers don't take kindly to cops talking to their employees at their place of business, but I wasn't feeling very charitable toward Amanda right then. She had sat there in Brooke's living room, privy to all we had talked about, knowing I was trying to find Samantha for a distraught and desperate father, and she had done nothing but clam up. She never once even indicated that she and Samantha had had a falling out. She never mentioned that she and Samantha had both been seeing the same man. That, in conjunction with what I had just learned, put Amanda at the top of my list for suspects. University Mall was one of two major shopping centers in Utah County. The close proximity of two large universities, BYU and Utah Valley University, kept it well stocked with both patrons and young workers. The Sew and Pin was on the southeastern end of the complex, which fortunately for me, was also close to a set of entry doors. After referring to a monolithic-sized map near the entrance, I walked to the store. The entry was open, and inside I could see that the Sew and Pin was a craft store, a miniature version of Hobby Lobby with shelves of various yarns and threads. I spotted a counter at the far end of the store, behind which there stood a female in her late teens or early 20s. She had freckles and a mound of red hair tied in a bun on her head. On her face were round black frame glasses. I could tell they were heavily smudged, even from 10 feet away. She watched me as I walked up, and the look on her face was comical. To call her awkward would not do the word justice. She was emanating almost panic when I reached the counter. I guessed men didn't frequent the place much. "Hello," I said, giving her the best smile in my arsenal. She didn't make eye contact with me, but quickly looked down at the register in front of her and began punching the keys. "Hi," she said in a mousy tone, so low I almost missed it. "Is Amanda Demford working today?" I asked. The air of near panic that I had sensed when I walked in changed into a full-blown version of it. She began fidgeting with her hands and biting her lower lip as she processed what I had asked her. "She's—" the girl began in an almost whisper and then paused, causing me to lean in to hear her better, which probably made her even more nervous. "She's not here right now." She continued to avoid eye contact with me. I decided that was probably the most I would get from her, so I took out my notebook and wrote my name and number on it. "Can you give this to her when you see her again? It's about something really important." The girl didn't respond except to nod and take the torn page from me. She glanced at the writing, then hurriedly put the paper down on the counter. I nodded my appreciation and walked out. I went back to my vehicle trying to think of the next place to look. If she wasn't at home or at work, the next logical place would be BYU, which wasn't an option for me unless I became desperate. Maybe she was with Broadhead. I retrieved my phone from my coat pocket and texted Kent. "Do you got eyes on Broadhead?" I typed. I waited about 10 seconds before he responded. "Not yet," he wrote. "I got to his house around 8:30. I've been watching the place since then, and no sign of him." I looked at my watch. It was now 10:48 a.m. "Keep an eye out for a woman in her 20s, I texted back. "Really good-looking brunette. Let me know right away if you see her. Don't talk to them until I get there if you see her." There wasn't a response for a few minutes, and I began to think he wasn't going to answer when another text appeared. "A really good-looking brunette? You mean Amanda Demford? You really think she'd be stupid enough to show up at his house?" I clenched my jaw in initial frustration because I knew he was right, but I relaxed when I thought it was just as well. If she was with Broadhead, it would be harder to talk her. Another text appeared on my screen. "I'm going to confront him about the affair if I get the chance. Do you want to wait until I get there? Have some backup?" I wrote back. There was another long pause before he answered. "I got it." And that was it. I put my phone down and started the expedition. I left the mall and drove to Brooke Kingston's apartment complex. I hoped Amanda would be there, or I could at least get Amanda's phone number. Her apartment had the same vacant sound to it as Amanda's had when I knocked. I tried knocking 3 times, the last time being extra long and loud. No one came to the door. I thought of the angry and posturing Craig who had tried his best to intimidate me the last time I was there. I didn't think he would be willing to tell me anything, but it was possible that one or both of the women were at his place. I muted the ringtone on my phone as I headed toward the stairs. I'd probably watched too many movies, but considering how my luck had been lately, I was sure that Kent would call me at the very moment I was about to catch Amanda on the sly. As I descended the stairs, my premonition was proven right when my phone dinged to inform me I had both a voicemail and a text from Kent. I listened to Kent's voicemail as I opened my messages to read the text. It was a link to Google Maps with the heading "Skylight Foundations" scrolled along the top. I tapped on it and saw a satellite image of a building in American Fork. Well, at least one of us is getting somewhere, I thought. I spent the next 30 minutes trying to be as nonchalant as possible as I walked around the complex in hopes of catching sight of either Craig or one of the women. The only thing I accomplished was drawing the attention of two huge-looking guys on the bottom level of the complex. Both of them had exited one of the apartments and watched me as I passed by their place, and only frowned when I offered a friendly smile. They looked big enough to be linebackers on the BYU football team, so I decided it was time to leave. I walked back out to my vehicle and got in with a sigh. I drummed my fingers for a minute, thinking about my options. The only avenue that seemed open at the moment was Broadhead. I drove to the freeway and headed north to American Fork. Skyway Foundations was located on the border of Linden and American Fork, barely a mile north of Utah Lake. When I was a kid, the area had been empty fields and farmland. Now it was a growing collection of business parks and new subdivisions. There were still pockets of seclusion, though, and as I got closer to Broadhead's business, the new subdivisions thinned out and revealed the marshy fields I remembered from my childhood. I thought it would be best to check with Kent before pulling into what was a surveillance operation. It was an unusually warm day for early December, so I rolled down the driver's side window and breathed in the lake-scented air. Kent answered after the first ring. "I was just about to call you," he said before I could say anything. "Broadhead just threw me off his property." "Really, I said. "That would have been fun to watch." "Well, I said that figuratively," Kent said. "I got no further than, 'I'm here to ask you about Samantha Palmerson,' and he was accusing me of trespassing and threatening to call the cops." Normally, I would have stayed to sweat the guy a little, but considering recent events and the fact I'm already on law enforcement's radar, I decided to comply. He's an arrogant jerk. I could tell that the second I laid eyes on him. "Well, that goes without saying. My guess is his wife would agree with you," I said. "I'm going to find out," Kent said and snorted a little in amusement. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm pulling up to his house right now. I'm going to go have a convo with her since the guy doesn't want to talk." I was stunned and pulled over on the side of the road so I could keep a level head while I talked. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked him, the alarm evident in my voice. "Don't know," he answered sanguinely. "I also don't care. We've been playing footsie, and I'm done. I'm going to go kick over the beehive." "Kent, wait a sec," I began. But before I could finish, he jumped in. He had his chance to keep it under wraps. He chose this. With that, Kent ended the call. I said, "Hello," a few times before realizing the connection had ended. I cursed and put my phone down on the passenger seat. "You got that right," I heard from my open driver's side window. I saw a slight blur out of my peripheral vision, and then felt an explosion of pain as a fist connected with the left side of my face. My head and body jolted to the right from the force of the blow, and my vision blurred slightly as the shock of the punch immediately put me into fight-or-flight mode. The body can do strange and often annoying things when surprised by an attack. A person well-versed in assault would know this, and could take advantage of those few seconds his victim would be paralyzed by confusion and shock. The person who had hit me did just that as they opened the driver's side door and yanked me out while I was still in a daze. I was off balance when my feet made contact with the pavement, and I slipped and fell on my rear end. My attacker kicked me in the face, and my sitting position turned into a prone position as I fell onto my back. He then straddled me, and I got my first glimpse of who was assaulting me. It was Craig from Brooke Kingston's apartment. His shots were exact and powerful. He threw 3 solid blows, one to my right eye, one to my nose. I felt it flatten, possibly getting broken, and another on my forehead. I began to see stars and knew I would be in trouble if I didn't change things quickly. I'd spent a decent amount of time on my back, training for just this kind of scenario. It was the second worst position to be in a fight. The worst was face down, with someone straddling you on your back. You really didn't have options in that scenario other than to cover the back of your head and neck with your hands and arms. If you were on your back, however, you had a few methods to try to turn the tables. One was the buck and roll. That was simply bucking your pelvis, which could cause the person straddling you to lose balance and fall forward, allowing you to maneuver into a grappling move to either attempt a choke or a roll and literally change positions with them. This was a good maneuver, and one an experienced grappler would often try. But if the person who had mounted you happened to also be an experienced grappler, he would likely anticipate such a move and deploy countermeasures to deter that from happening. In a supervised combat sports scenario, it was all part of the game. It came down to who was stronger and who was quicker. It was something you trained countless hours for, and I had deep respect for experienced and trained grapplers. But this wasn't the UFC. This wasn't an arena with a referee and rules. This was on the street, literally in this case, and the results could be permanent injury and death. Kent and I were both fans of Kelly McCann and his combatives program. McCann's techniques were simple to learn and apply, yet extremely effective. I crossed my arms in front of me like McCann taught, instead of the usual warding off guard you'd often see in MMA fights. This allowed me to not only block blows aimed for my face and neck, but also set up a technique that was almost 100% effective if done quickly and accurately. I bucked my torso, hoping it would put him off balance. It did. He put both hands out to keep himself from being face-planted on the pavement. This exposed his upper torso. I curled the fingers of my right hand to form a hook, then reached out and grabbed the top of his left clavicle. I pulled down as hard as I could while, at the same time, sharply rolling to my right. As I did, I felt a slight give in his bone. He let out a loud shriek of pain, and I was pretty sure I had just broken his collarbone. I continued with the roll, and within a few seconds our roles had completely reversed. Craig was now the mounted one, and with one major difference, he had a serious injury to his shoulder, making it extremely difficult for him to defend himself with his left arm. Punches were generally good for sport fighting like boxing. It was mainly a Western concoction that had been interwoven into Eastern martial arts over the past few centuries. I personally saved punches only for soft body areas, like the kidneys. I'd found palm strikes and hammer fists were better for the bony parts of the body. When in a mounted position, hammer fists were devastating. When someone was on the ground, their maneuverability was cut by 40%. Craig's injured shoulder, which was likely broken, made his mobility even less than that. My former Krav Maga instructor would have been proud of what I began to do. I used every bit of weight I could in my hammer fists as I drove down onto his face. Craig did the best he could to ward them off with his undamaged right arm, but it was impossible for him to keep up. For every blow he successfully warded off, I got in at least two. One strike dislodged two of his front teeth. I saw teeth bits fly out of his mouth when he expelled air from his lungs as I hit him. Another hit flattened his nose, and I hammered it continuously until I knew it was broken in at least two places. I hammered down on his jaw a half-dozen times, pivoting my weight to add power, resulting in it becoming dislocated if not broken. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, a sure sign of unconsciousness, and his body began that peculiar twitching a person often experiences when knocked out. I was angry enough that I might have continued hammering down on him if I hadn't suddenly felt a blow on the back of my head. This was one of the reasons I avoided hand-to-hand fighting, and most of all grappling, as much as possible. You were so vulnerable in a grappling situation. Your field of vision was usually limited to the person you were engaged with. Just as bad, you often had to use both arms and legs, thus making yourself extremely vulnerable to weapons and multiple attackers. I hadn't seen anyone else during the fight with Craig, but I certainly felt a foot connect with my head, then my ribs, as I turned to see who it was. A female, a fairly tall one, with shapely legs and long brunette hair. It was Amanda. Her face was a mixture of fury and terror. "Leave him alone!" she screamed as she wound up to kick me again. I was already hyped on adrenaline and therefore able to quickly snap out of my surprise and go on the attack. I rolled off of Craig and onto my stomach. I brought my right leg under me and stood while keeping my left hand on the ground and my right hand up to protect my face. I did all of this from habit, having practiced it hundreds of times. I was on my feet and moving toward her in seconds. She hadn't anticipated this and began to move back, her terror now taking a front seat to her rage. I was on her before she could move away. I thrust out my right hand, my right thumb extended to create a V shape. I hit her throat and thrust forward with all my weight. She did what only a petite woman who couldn't weigh more than 110 pounds does when struck by a man who weighed 225. She abruptly fell back and onto her rear end. Her eyes became wide saucers, the terror now panic, all the fury gone, her chest heaving in and out rapidly as she tried to breathe through her assaulted throat. I continued moving forward, brought my right knee up, and kicked her in the torso. This caused her to fall flat on her back. I then straddled her the same way I had done to Craig. Her eyes remained panicked, and her chest moved up and down under my weight as she took in small, desperate breaths. There was a chance I had done fatal damage to her larynx, but I doubted it. It was most likely just spasms causing her throat to contract slightly, making it difficult for her to breathe. It was a terrifying ordeal, one I personally had experienced. If you weren't familiar with it, you became convinced you were going to choke to death. The best way to respond was to remain calm. Flooding your bloodstream with adrenaline was the last thing you wanted to do, but that wasn't easy if you didn't know what was happening. Just calm down, I told her. Your throat is having a temporary spasm. It will stop in a minute. Just relax and try to take slow and easy breaths. This did little to calm her down. Her eyes darted around, and she made small gasping noises as if she were trying to call out for help. I got close to her face and spoke her name. Amanda, calm down. Don't try to take in a breath so hard. You're just making it worse. Slow and steady, and you'll find breathing easier. She listened this time and began to slow her gasps. Eventually, she was able to draw in a long breath. The sound that came out of her mouth was similar to the sound a person makes when they snore. I was relieved to hear it. I guessed she wasn't going to be any further risk to me, so I stood up and stepped back a few feet. She continued to lie on the ground, taking in long, labored breaths. The panic in her eyes had subsided. I looked over at Craig and noticed he was conscious but dazed and not moving. I looked back at Amanda and offered my hand. Come on, I said, stand up. She stared at my hand for a few seconds, as if unsure whether I was offering help or engaging in some kind of dirty trick to hurt her again. She finally took my hand after a few seconds and struggled to her feet, all the while still taking labored breaths. It would be a good 2 or 3 days before her throat felt normal again. I felt a tinge of guilt about doing it to a woman, but she had been kicking me in the head and ribs, and this after sitting idly by as Craig tried to beat me senseless on the side of the road. So though I felt a bit of guilt, the larger part of me thought she deserved what had happened. And if she was responsible for Samantha's disappearance, she deserved a whole lot more. I helped Amanda get steadied against the side of my expedition, where she stayed bent over and drawing in wheezing breaths. I looked at Craig and saw that he was now sitting up and gingerly feeling the inside of his mouth with his right index finger. I suppose he was mulling over the future dental work he was going to need. I did my own mulling about what had just happened. The two of them had been following me. I wasn't sure for how long, but maybe since I had left Amanda's apartment, possibly since University Mall, certainly since I left Brooks Complex. The great Seth Greenwood, super sleuth, was had by 2 novice college kids. I was starting to think I should look for another line of work. They were both novices at fighting as well. I imagined Craig wouldn't be so quick to sucker punch someone again. I shook my head at the sight and said out loud, "What a mess." I chewed the inside of my left cheek as I thought about what to do. I still needed to talk to Amanda. She and Craig had just committed a serious crime, and Ken and I had credible reasons to pin her as a major suspect in Samantha's disappearance. I had some good leverage to use on her. "Can you talk?" I said to Amanda. She raised her head at the sound of my question and let out an sound, as if testing her voice box to see if it still worked. "Is this your car or Craig's?" I asked, pointing to a blue Mazda. She said, rubbing her throat with a pained expression. "Mine. It's mine." "I need you to help me get Craig into the passenger seat," I told her. Her eyes stared at me with defiance. "I need you to understand something, Amanda, and I need Craig to understand as well. You're going to answer some questions for me. You haven't been upfront with me. You're going to tell me what involvement you had in Samantha's disappearance, or I'm going to the cops right now." Her eyes now showed some of the anger I had seen earlier, and she started to shake her head a little as I finished. "You just seriously hurt Craig and me, and you think the cops are going to be on your side?" she asked, her voice muffled due to her injured throat. "I injured both of you defending myself," I explained. "It was 2-on-1. I think the cops are going to lean my way instead of yours. Plus, I spoke to someone who knows you were involved in a relationship with Clark Broadhead at the same time Samantha was. That makes you a prime suspect. My guess is the cops are going to see it the same way." "Nope. We're going to drop Craig off in front of the emergency room so he can get his shoulder looked at, and you and I are going to go somewhere else where we can talk. Agree right now, or I'm calling 911. This was partially a bluff. She was right that the cops weren't going to be thrilled with what I had just done to both of them, even if it was in self-defense. I was also sure the two of them could both come up with a nonsense story about how I had actually assaulted them if they had a chance to get together and talk about it. But I was going to push her when she was still scared and not thinking clearly. If she called my bluff, I would still call the cops. But I would also be calling an attorney right after. I texted Kent while I waited to see what she would do. Meet me at the shop ASAP. I found Amanda and I need backup. Where are you going to take me? She asked. To my office, I answered. You can't just kidnap me, she said weakly. You can't kidnap me and then threaten to call the cops. I began to think she was calling my bluff, but her words had a tone of desperation, and I took a gamble that she was the one bluffing now. Amanda, I'm not going to take you there against your will. You're going to have to make up a cover story about how he got messed up. Craig is going to have to say he had an accident or something. Either you agree right now, or I'm calling the cops. I held my phone up for emphasis and began opening the call screen to show I was serious. She folded and gave in. She walked over to Craig and asked him, "Can you talk?" Craig raised his head and spoke through what sounded like a mouthful of oatmeal. Kinda. Craig had definitely come out on the losing end of the fight. I wasn't completely sure of the level of damage for me yet. My ribs ached, and I thought one or two of them might be cracked. My nose was throbbing. I checked my reflection in the window of Amanda's car. It looked swollen but not broken. My phone dinged, letting me know I had received a text. It was Kent. In the middle of being screamed at by a very mad Mrs. Broadhead. I'll be there as quick as I can. I put my phone in my back pocket and watched Amanda as she spoke to Craig. We're going to drop you off at AF Hospital. Then I'm going to go with this guy to his office. You need to tell the hospital staff that you fell off your motorcycle or something. He looked at her, dazed and confused. What do you mean? He asked. Except when he said it, it was a distorted, "What'd you mean?" If you tell them this guy beat you up, they'll call the cops. You need to make something up, Amanda said. Maybe I should, he said, now eyeing me with hatred. If you do, he'll tell them I had something to do with Samantha's disappearance. I could get into trouble, she said, and I looked at her suspiciously. She really did have something to do with it, I thought. The thought made me sad. These kids were supposedly good Mormons going to BYU. All of it was starting to play out like a bad soap opera, and I was getting worn down by it. I'd spent the better part of the past 5 years dealing with bail jumpers and certified criminals, and I hadn't seen this level of cold, calculated violence and hate. Craig continued looking at Amanda with confusion, but then nodded and tilted his head down toward his lap. Okay, he said reservedly. I suddenly realized something I should have caught earlier. Craig had a serious crush on Amanda. Everything he had done, including the antics in Brooke's apartment, made sense now that I could look at it in that light. She stood up and made eye contact with me. It'll be okay. He understands. I looked at both of them. Her confident gaze and what she had just said and his subservient posture convinced me, and I nodded my head. Okay, I said. Let's put him in the car and get moving. We each took an arm and helped him to his feet. He let out a sharp yelp of pain when I yanked on his left shoulder, and I immediately let go, remembering a little too late that it was broken. I grabbed him at the waist instead, and we moved him gingerly to the passenger side of Amanda's car and slowly lowered him in. He winced and moaned the entire time. Once we had him in the seat and buckled, I shut the door. I turned to Amanda. We need to move fast once we get to the hospital to help reduce the chance someone will get a license plate number. We're going to let him off about 300 or 400 yards from the entrance. You're getting out and helping him out of the car, but he'll have to walk up to the entrance on his own. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but I gave her a dead stare that told her it was pointless, so she just nodded and got in the back seat. I got in the driver's seat and saw that she had left the keys in the ignition. I turned the car on and drove toward the hospital. It was a quiet trip other than the occasional moan of pain from Craig whenever he was jostled by a bump or a turn. When we neared the hospital, I slowed the car and surveyed the area for any sign of cops or loiterers in the parking lot. The coast was clear, and I wasted no time pulling in and stopping. Go now, and make it quick, I told Amanda, and then I crouched low in the seat. She did as ordered and practically yanked a protesting Craig out. Are you sure it's okay? He asked her. Her only response was, Yes, and we were off as soon as she got in the passenger seat. I watched a stumbling Craig make his way to the emergency room entrance in the rear view window as we pulled out of the parking lot. That kid has it for you bad, I said for no real reason. Amanda didn't even register that I said something. She just stared ahead through the windshield. I shrugged and looked ahead as well, and it was silent for the rest of the drive. The shop was only a couple of miles away, and we were there in less than 10 minutes. I felt nervous about what Craig would say to the hospital staff and what he would do if they chose to call the cops regardless of his story. His injuries were obviously caused by a fight, but I hoped his crush on Amanda would be strong enough for him to stick to the cover story. I was now well down the slippery slope of ends, justifying the means. What I was party to was nothing less than lying to cops. It was a dangerous path, but this was the time to push Amanda and push her hard. I'd deal with the fallout later. When we arrived at the shop, I pulled Kent's chair out for her to sit on and then sat on my own across from her, our knees almost touching. I wasted no time and got straight to the point. What happened to Samantha? I have no idea, Amanda answered. Bull crap, Amanda. You and Samantha were seeing the same guy. Tell me right now what happened to her, or I'm just going to call the cops like I said. That's our deal. If you come clean with me, I'll give you a chance to contact a lawyer and get things squared up before I contact the police. Things will go 1,000 times better for you if it goes that way. I actually had no idea if it would go better for her or not. I suppose if she actually personally killed Samantha, it wouldn't do much for her cause regardless. Bringing a killer to justice wasn't what I was hired to do, however. I was hired to find out what happened. What ensued with the police afterward wasn't my concern or my problem. She mulled it over, then drew in a deep breath and let it out in a long sigh. I didn't want Craig to attack you, she said. She looked and sounded sincere when she said it, and I was taken aback a little. There was the slightest tinge of thought in my mind that perhaps I was judging her wrongly, but I silenced it immediately with the fresh memory of her kicking me in the head. It didn't feel that way when you showed my head the bottom of your sneakers, I said sarcastically. She gave a slight bemused smile. I thought you were going to kill Craig. He was only there because I asked him to help me. So it was, in fact, your idea for him to yank me out of my truck and start punching me in the face, I asked? She shook her head. No, that's not what happened. He was so upset at you that he got out of the car and did that on his own when you pulled over. I just wanted to talk to you, tell you what was really going on. She stopped talking and looked out the front window when the surveillance van pulled into the front parking lot. We both watched Kent get out of the van and walk in the front door. He gave Amanda a hard once-over, then glanced over at me and raised his eyebrows up and down twice in quick succession as a way of saying hello. I raised my hand in greeting and said, "Here, have my chair," as I got up. "No way," Kent said quickly. He walked out into the garage and quickly came back in, carrying an old bar stool with Napa tools stenciled over the top. He used it in the garage to sit on under his vehicle if he was doing a job that took a long time. Ken already had bad knees at the age of 35 and couldn't stand for more than a few hours without being in considerable pain. He brought the chair over, placed it next to Amanda, and then sat down. The bar stool caused him to be almost 2 feet higher than both Amanda and I, and this, in conjunction with his biker appearance, made him an imposing figure. Amanda looked at him apprehensively, and I realized then that she hadn't met him yet. "This is my business partner, Kent Somerville." Kent smiled, no doubt appreciating her beauty. I could tell she wasn't quite sure what to think of him, or why he was suddenly part of the interview. I decided this would work more to our advantage and immediately pressed her. "Amanda, tell me right now everything you know about Samantha and what happened to her." She looked back at me and said nothing for a few seconds, and then she brought her purse around and opened it. As she did this, I noticed Kent lean forward a little and place his right hand under the opened button-down shirt he was wearing over a t-shirt. I was certain he was doing so in order to quickly draw the Glock 22 he always carried in a shoulder holster. "Easy and slow," he said, his eyes fixed on her hands. She stopped startled and looked pensively at Kent. She noticed the position of his hand and then looked quickly at me. "It's just a receipt," she said. She slowly withdrew her hand, revealing a white slip of paper with computer printing on it. She handed it to me and gestured that I should look at it. I did. Kent leaned over and read it too. The Mirage was written on top. It was a receipt for $323.70. I looked back at her quizzically, and she again gestured to the receipt. "Look at the date," she said. It read November 12th, 2014 to November 14th, 2014. I looked back at her, not getting it. "Samantha was first reported missing on November 13th, 2014, Kent said. I looked over at him, and he nodded. "Definitely." I didn't doubt him. He had an iron trap memory when it came to facts and statistics. I looked at Amanda again. "Explain what this means," I said. "I was in Vegas when she went missing. Both me—" She hesitated for a second, looking a little embarrassed, then said, "And Clark Broadhead. We were there together." I looked at her closely, trying to gauge the truth of it. I gave a quick glance at Kent, and he was staring at her with an amused expression on his face. Kent was always happy to see his predisposed opinions of Mormon hypocrisy confirmed. I tried not to be annoyed. I looked back at Amanda, and she was biting the fingernail of her right index finger and looking at the ancient cracked tile floor of our office. "It seems kind of convenient that you would save that receipt and just happen to have it with you in your purse," I said. She peeked at me quickly and looked back down. Samantha had found out Clark and I were going to Vegas. She confronted me at Brooke's dorm when I went there to get a swimsuit Brooke had borrowed from me. I wanted to get it back for the trip. I didn't know Samantha was going to be there. She was supposed to be at work. It turned out that only she was there, and Brooke was at the library. Amanda stopped speaking and looked up at me, maybe to see if I believed her. "How did she know you and Broadhead were going to Vegas?" I asked, now starting to truly feel like I had blundered badly. I wasn't ready to outright believe her yet, but I could feel the word doofus beginning to get sketched on my forehead. If what she was saying was true, we were back to square one. She claimed Clark told her. She was furious. She yelled and screamed about how I had used her to get to Clark. Amanda shook her head contemptuously and ran her right hand through her hair. It was ridiculous. I had met Clark the same way she did, at the elementary school when he had come to pick up his son. The fight was really loud, and I was sure others heard us. I had left the receipt in my purse, and when we got back, I learned Samantha was missing. I thought I might be accused of something, so I kept it. She looked sheepish. It was weak, but plausible. I bit my lower lip and weighed it all, wondering if I should buy it. "So he had you pay for it," Kent said with relish. He had the same amused expression as before. Amanda's eyes got a small glint of fire as she irritably responded. "He paid me back for all of it. We only used my debit card so there wouldn't be record of it on his account." Kent's expression changed to menace. "Yeah, it would definitely cause Mrs. Broadhead to ask some questions if she got a peek at the credit card statement," he said mockingly. Amanda gave him an icy stare. "He loves me." "Oh, he loves something all right." Kent snorted through his nose. Okay, I hurriedly said to keep things from turning into a fight. I gave Kent a cut-it-out look and turned to Amanda. "So how much of all this does Brooke know?" Amanda looked surprised by the question. "Why do you want to know that?" "Because both of you could have saved everyone, especially yourself, Amanda, a lot of grief if you had both just told me all of this at her apartment." I said this with a touch of anger. I was genuinely ticked at Brooke for stopping the conversation the other day and not leveling with me. "She told you what she knows, I suppose," she finally said. "She's never known about me and Clark." I let my annoyance show. "Amanda, we need to see more than just the hotel receipt. Do you have anything else that puts both of you out of town when Samantha went missing?" I said icily. She reached into her purse again, and though Kent seemed more contemptuous of Amanda now instead of threatened, he still had his hand resting on his lap and strategically poised to reach for his Glock. What she pulled out was a phone. She tapped it and entered her password. She tapped it again a few times, then held it out for me to take. I looked at the screen. It was a picture of Amanda and a man who appeared to be in his 30s. The two were standing in front of a marquee that said Titanic. I recognized it immediately from news and internet articles. It was the Titanic exhibit in Las Vegas. I looked at the picture closely. The man was dressed in a leather jacket, blue jeans, and gray polo shirt. Amanda was in a short black dress that showed off her runway model legs. They were both smiling and looking like they were enjoying themselves. Kent leaned forward and looked closely at the picture. That's Broadhead, he stated matter-of-factly and leaned back up straight on the stool. In the background of the photo, I saw something I figured Amanda wanted me to see. The date of the show. It said, November 13th, special viewing of Banter Casket. Not wanting to show her that I saw the significance of the date, I asked, "What's the Banter Casket?" Her face tightened with irritation. "It's the casket of one of the victim's father," she said. "They were transporting his body overseas, and the casket had been lost in the accident. It was found 10 years later by a Swedish fishing vessel. The casket has actually been in Sweden all these years, but the Swedish government allowed the casket to be put on display for a few months in Vegas as part of the exhibit." I nodded to show I understood and handed her phone back to her. Kent cleared his throat, and we both looked at him. "That sure worked out for you," he said in a sardonic tone. Amanda ignored him as she put her phone back in her purse. "I have no doubt I could get more bank receipts from our trip. There should be credit card statements from when we went to restaurants and got gas. He also bought me a necklace at a jewelry store in Vegas. I don't have the receipt for it with me, but I'll bet I could find proof of where and when it was bought. We had nothing to do with her disappearance." "Do you have any idea what happened to her?" I asked her. "None," she said. "Not a clue. I didn't like her. I'll admit that. I still don't. I'm not going to lie and say I'm sad she isn't around. But I didn't do a thing to her. The last time I saw her or had anything to do with her was the day we got in that argument. I was as surprised by her disappearance as anyone." "What about Loverboy?" Kent asked. "He's got money to burn if he can take you to lost wages and blow thousands on his side hustle. I'm sure he could afford a few hundred or so and have someone do it for you guys. I know people who'll kidnap and kill for that much and even less." She gave Kent a disgusted look and then turned back to me. "What about it?" I asked her. Kent's question, albeit insulting, was a good one. I wanted to know what she thought. "There's no way," Amanda said. "How do you know?" I asked her. "I just do. He would never do anything like that," she said. Kent let out a bark of laughter. "I'm sure his wife thinks he wouldn't run off with a BYU co-ed to Vegas either." "Shut up!" Amanda suddenly yelled at Kent, the rage that I saw out on the street an hour earlier now back in her eyes. I didn't know if Broadhead was capable of killing Samantha, but I thought this kid was. "At least when she's mad," I said to myself. I didn't want to deal with an irate, crazy woman. I felt like we had really been getting somewhere, so I motioned at Kent to cool it. I snapped my fingers to get Amanda's attention. She continued to stare at Kent for a second longer, then finally shifted her burning eyes to me. "My business partner has had a bad day, even worse than mine. Just ignore his remarks and pay attention to me for a second." She didn't speak, but I could tell she was ready to blow up at me. "Focus, Amanda," I said a little sharply. She was mad, but it hadn't helped her on the roadside. In fact, it had gotten her struck in the throat and put on her keister, and I thought I needed to remind her of that. My tone seemed to do that for her, and she became subdued again. Kent shrugged, took out his phone, and began studying something he saw on the screen. I drew in a deep breath, letting it out in a long exhale to calm my nerves. It was important for this to end on a rational point. Having her leave angry or scared would cause her to do something rash, like contact the police. The cops were the last people I wanted involved right now. They would only complicate things. And after my recent experiences with the Provo and BYU police departments, I had zero trust in law enforcement. When I felt like I had both my temper and nerves under control, I spoke. "Amanda, we're not going to contact the police right now. We're going to take you at your word and accept that you and Broadhead were in Vegas when Samantha went missing. But I want your oath that you'll stay out of our way. And what I mean by that is I don't want to see Craig or anyone else you know approach either one of us. I want both you and Craig to keep your mouths shut. You seriously mucked things up by not coming clean about everything earlier. I'm not going to cut you a bit of slack if you cause any more damage. Is that understood?" She looked at me for a few seconds and then gave a small and slow nod. "I want to hear you say it," I said. "Yes," she said, "I understand." "You'll talk to Craig, tell him what I said?" She nodded yes again. "Good," I said. "Then you can leave. I mean what I say. Any kind of threats or meddling from you or someone you know means we go straight to the cops and tell them we consider you a prime suspect." She seemed ready to say something. to perhaps protest her innocence, but then just gave another slow nod and stood up. She strung her purse around her back and walked toward the door. Ken and I watched her leave and get into her car out front. She was gone 30 seconds later, and silence filled the office as I sat and continued looking at the spot her car had just occupied. Kent went back to studying his phone. "So you and Mrs. Broadhead didn't get on so well?" I asked, not looking at him. "Like cats and dogs," Ken answered. "She claimed not to believe a word I said. She was in total denial, just started screaming at me to get off her doorstep after I asked her if she knew her husband was having an affair." I didn't say anything, only nodded. It was a low thing to do, but Clark Broadhead deserved it. I supposed his wife would have found out eventually anyway, but I still felt bad for her. I looked down at the numerous cracks in the tile on the ancient floor of our office. It was time for me to eat crow, and I needed to man up and be the one to first broach the subject. "I screwed up," I said. Kent didn't respond. He just continued studying his phone. I gazed directly at him, and he didn't change his posture or peek my way. It was my call, and it was the wrong one. We just wasted a bunch of time because of me. Kent looked up, met my eyes for only a brief second, and then looked at the fluorescent lights overhead, pushing his lips out in a pout. He drew air in between clenched teeth and made a clicking sound with his tongue. "Nah," he said. "It was the wrong path, but it wasn't a waste of time any more than Wilding was. We had to follow it and see where it led." I appreciated his charity. I threw my hands up in a surrender motion. "I've been wrong twice now," I said. "I'm willing to step back, follow your lead on this." He continued to look at the light contemplatively, trying to navigate the new waters we suddenly found ourselves in. From the very beginning of the case, I had taken the lead and called the shots. Kent had been the one to land the case, but I had completely taken over. I didn't blame myself for doing so. It had happened because Kent had been out of control. But we had gotten almost nowhere. All we had to show was who hadn't done it. The one consideration we hadn't perused seriously yet was the possibility that the girl had just simply run away and didn't want to be found. Maybe the reason we kept finding no connections to her disappearance was the simple fact that there weren't any. Maybe she was alive and well in Southern California and living a life she always wanted, a life that didn't include her duplicitous and caustic father. Away from what might have seemed to her a suffocating existence at a deeply conservative and religious school. I was now officially without ideas. Kent groaned and rubbed his shoulder as he closed his eyes in pain. "How's your shoulder doing?" I asked. "Still hurts. It kept me up most of the night last night. I got some codeine the doctor prescribed for me, but it only dulls it for a few hours. I'm seriously going to kill those two child rapists if I ever see them again." I didn't respond, mainly because I neither wanted to encourage nor discourage his sentiments. "I got so caught up in today's happenings, I haven't told you about what my neighbor said to me," I said. Ken opened his eyes and turned his head slightly in my direction. His eyes had a slightly guarded look, no doubt wary of more bad news. "Someone in my complex was outside smoking a cigarette when you and Chrissy showed up outside my place last Monday," I continued. Kent's look turned from guarded to apprehensive as he heard this, possibly imagining the same scenario I had about Chrissy hitting someone or someone's car. "You guys saved my life, or at least Chrissy did." Kent's eyes now showed bewilderment. "Little Richard and Lewis were in my apartment when you guys pulled up, and Chrissy began blowing that stupid train horn of yours. I think they thought someone had spotted them creep in, and the horn spooked them. I'm pretty sure they were there to kill me." Kent sat and stared at me, saying nothing. I broke eye contact and looked forward. "I thought you had the right to know that." Kent looked forward too, still not voicing any response to what I just told him. I saw a visible change in his body language. "I'm open to whatever and wherever you want to go from here," I said. Kent kept a neutral face. He continued to look at the light fixture. "The only angles I see are the homeless people and Jepson's brother," he said. Kent was like that. He rarely held grudges. I nodded my agreement. "Okay," I said. "What's our next move?" He lowered his head and made eye contact with me. "I wish we could interview Jepson," Kent said. "He would be the best bet, but he's out of reach. It'll have to be Gordon Parkinson." "So back to the apartment? Stake it out?" Kent nodded his head yes. I think we should get more assertive. Both of us give a show of force. Most of those guys cave when they think it's going to be trouble. I nodded in agreement again. I was beginning to feel exhausted. The day's events were catching up to me. The back of my head ached where Amanda had kicked me, and my nose throbbed from Craig's punches. Plus, my expedition was still parked on the road, possibly already towed by the American Fork Police. I need a ride to my vehicle if it's okay, and then I need to call it quits. I think I've had enough sleuthing for the day. Kent smiled a little. I was going to ask you about that hamburger face, but I thought it might embarrass you in front of your girlfriend. I gave a derisive laugh. Yeah, it was my girlfriend that caused me to look like this. I gave him a brief synopsis of what had happened. Kent chuckled. You never have had good luck with women? I stretched and winced when I felt a sharp pain in my lower left side. I imagined when I peeled off my shirt tonight, I would have a bruise the size of Kentucky. That, my friend, is the mother of all understatements, I said. Chapter 14. Kay Ent and I had agreed to meet about a quarter of a mile down the street from Jepson's apartment at 9:30 the next morning. When I had gotten home the night before, I had indeed discovered a Kentucky-sized bruise on my lower back, as well as some pretty nasty-looking ones on much of the rest of my body. The lower section on the right side of my jaw was taking on a dark hue, and it hurt to move my mouth. I had been in too much pain, in fact, to eat anything when I woke up, so I'd finally settled on a protein shake. It hurt to even open my mouth enough to drink it down. Kent was already parked in front of a row of dilapidated-looking tenements when I arrived. I had expected him to be in the surveillance van, but he had instead driven the monstrosity. I'm not late, am I? I asked as I approached his vehicle. His driver's side window was down, and he was slouched down a little in his seat. Nah, I just wanted to be here before 9 in case the tweak had actually had a job or something, he said. I imagined a junkie having a job, not to mention one that required him to work Sunday mornings, about as likely as Donald Trump inviting Rosie O'Donnell to be his next chief of staff. But I still had to admire Kent's thoroughness of thought. Kent opened his door and got out. I saw the metallic glint of his Mossberg 12-gauge. He had it resting against the passenger seat, with the butt on the floor, and the barrel slanted toward the passenger window. I gestured to it with my chin. What's with the scattergun? He looked back at it, then shut the door and locked it. Just a little more bite to our bark if the two short eyes show up. We typically only carried something like that for a forced entry. There wasn't a bond out on Jepson or his brother, which meant we had zero authority to do such a thing, even if we knew Jepson was in the apartment. We'd be no different than any other home invaders. But Kent kept it in the vehicle, so I decided to not say anything more about it. We walked up to the front door. I stayed 3 feet behind him. The apartment was one of 5 in a rectangular building that stretched perhaps 500 yards. It was in bad shape. Weeds grew out between 100 cracks in the cement walkway in front. 3 of the apartments had taped-up windows. Gordon Parkinson lived in Unit C, and I could see from the damaged door frame that it had been forced open before. It was anyone's guess as to why. Drugs, alcohol, and unstable temperaments were a sure mix for violence and chaos. I instinctively traced the imprint of my chief's special in a conceal holster on my right hip. It was a bad habit, but I found it irresistible in the situation. Kent knocked on the front door, and we stood to either side as we waited for a response. I kept my right hand poised to quickly draw my weapon if I needed to. Kent put his left hand on his left hip, a posture that wouldn't seem unusual to the casual viewer, but one that I knew he did to keep the flap of his shirt away so he could easily get to his shoulder-holstered Glock. We waited 30 seconds. The only sound we heard was the rustling of garbage blowing across the ground by a slight breeze. Kent knocked again, this time harder and longer, and I stepped back another 3 feet to get a better look at the south end of the building. I wonder if I should go around the back to see if he's ducked out that way, I said. Kent looked at me. Only if he went out a window. There isn't a door back there. I stepped back a little more and noticed that if someone did squeeze out a back window, they would still have to come around the front unless they scaled a 15-foot concrete privacy wall that ran directly behind the building. The sound of a train suddenly filled the air as one zoomed by heading north. That explained the privacy wall. Crap, Kent said and walked over to where I stood. Either he's sleeping off a binge or he's flown the coop. He looked up and down the street and then carefully studied the other units. Keep an eye out, he said as he walked back up to the front door. He reached into his front pocket and brought out what might be mistaken for a glue gun. Kent placed the nozzle end of the gun to the knob of the door and pulled back on a lever that resembled a trigger. He was using a snap gun, a lock-pick gun, on the door's lock. The device could often open any low-quality or old-style lock within seconds. Kent, I hissed, how smart is this? He didn't even look back at me. Keep a lookout. The lock on this door was probably installed during Bill Clinton's first term. I'll have it open in a second. He was right. Almost immediately after he finished speaking, he had the lock picked. He placed the gun against the deadbolt, which looked equally old, and pulled the trigger again. It took longer, maybe a minute, but he opened that one as well and pushed the door open. "Come on," was all he said as he walked in. I looked around again, positive there would be a cop, a passerby, or a neighborhood kid to see us breaking and entering, but I saw nothing but an empty street. I followed him in. The apartment was like Kent had described to me on the phone a few days prior. The place was a collection of discarded fast food debris, clothes, empty beer cans, most of those being the cheap horse pea taste variety, and a few empty bottles of low-brand vodka. An older model TV and a ratty brown couch that may have been beige long ago were the only trappings of the small living room. The place smelled like a million stale cigarettes, old animal feces, and human body odor. I turned my nose up in disgust and didn't move as Kent quickly made his way to a room adjacent to the living room. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I had stupidly left it open and compounded my stupidity by touching it barehanded. I thought of the fingerprints and used the bottom of my t-shirt to wipe the knob clean and also used it as a makeshift glove as I softly closed the door. The room immediately felt 100 times more oppressive with the door shut, bathing the place in gloom. "Kent, what are we doing?" I asked as he disappeared into the room beyond. "Seeing if this fool is still around," Kent answered. I reluctantly followed him, not sure how we would be able to tell with the living habits of the guy. But I wasn't going to stand in this room by myself amidst the paraphernalia of a drug addict. The next room was a bedroom, its conditions similar to the living room. An old queen-size mattress and box spring lay on a rusty metal bed frame. A filthy, naked pillow and an old blanket lay on top of it. I noticed what looked to be surgical tubing and a spoon on a nightstand next to the bed. I pointed to it. "Do you think a junkie would leave his kit behind?" Kent looked to where I was pointing and shrugged. "Maybe if he thought he was coming home again," he said. "So you think he's still around?" I asked. "If he's gone, it hasn't been for long," Kent said. "The landlord hasn't moved his stuff out yet, so he can't be more than a month behind on the rent." Kent walked into a small bathroom adjacent to the bedroom. He looked in the sink and then in the tub. He ran his hand along the sides of the tub, then turned back to the sink and opened the doors to the cabinet below. He let out a sound of disgust and quickly closed them. "You don't want to see what's under there," he said and walked back into the bedroom. I had my eyebrows raised in a question, and he grinned a little. Discarded toilet paper, it looked like. "What?" I asked. He only nodded, and it was my turn to emit a sound of disgust. "He hasn't been here for at least a day," Kent said. "Both the sink and tub are bone dry."